Welcome to another edition of the series, History of the Jewish State in Israel. My name is Dr. Robert Wolf, and I am joined with Dr. Sheldon Hirsch and Ari Fries. Excited to report that I had a very brief discussion with President Joe Biden this week, and he expressed his interest in the contents of this series. We are also grateful to the enthusiastic response to our initial shows as we seek to present a clear and honest description of Jewish life and the development of the Jewish state in Israel for over 1,400 years, from Joshua and the Israelites entering Israel in 1273 BCE to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE and the fall of Beitar and the death of Bar Kokhba and Rabbi Akiva in Beitar in 135 CE. More than 2 million Jews were slaughtered by the Romans in these events, to the point that the rivers surrounding Jerusalem became reddened from the dead Jewish bodies. Included in these deaths were the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva who valiantly and bravely fought the Roman legions with sticks and handmade weapons. In the final days of the Roman conquest, Rabbi Akiva designated 5 rabbis to carry on our oral tradition in exile, include writing the Mishnah and Talmud, as well as all other related laws and observances. They were given this responsibility and duty to maintain Jewish law and tradition in the face of the Roman massacres that had just occurred. Among the 5 rabbis were Shimon ben Yochai, who wrote the Zohar, and Yossi bar Chalifta, who would proceed to write the famous Seder Olam in the 2nd century CE. Though the Jewish calendar was not produced until 357 CE by Hillel II, thus not allowing for real Jewish dating, especially on a yearly basis. Monthly dating we were able to have, but not yearly dating. Rav Yossi bar Chalifta in Seder Olam made an effort to provide a chronology of Jewish events going back to Abraham. Though many have suggested that Seder Olam was actually written much earlier by perhaps Abraham or Moshe, the truth is that this student of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi bar Chalifta, actually wrote in the aftermath of the Roman conquest this Seder Olam. Since most of our history was transmitted orally, it is not clear what data Rabbi Yossi bar Chalifta used in actually writing Seder Olam, particularly since he had no yearly calendar for another 2 centuries. But Seder Olam, despite that, became and still is the most significant description of historical events and sequences in the Jewish world until the rise of Islam in the 6th century CE. We will return in a later show to questions surrounding the dating of the holidays, such as Hanukkah and Purim, and the question of the missing 163 years during the end of the Second Temple period. But what is more critically important is to remember that Jews lived in an entirely Jewish state in Israel for over 1,400 years until 135 CE and over 500 years prior to the rise of Islam and the expulsion of most Jews from Israel. This expulsion was speeded up in 1099 CE during the First Christian Crusade. But do not forget that Islamic interest in Israel did not manifest itself for over 1900 years after a Jewish state was created in Israel. And Muhammad was not even born until 1800 years after a Jewish state was realized. And now, Shelley, we look forward to hearing more of the history of anti-Semitism as it has manifested itself.
Okay, Bob, thank you. Good evening to one and all. I'd like to extend our sincerest thanks to all of our listeners. If there is one lesson to be learned from all that is unfolding right before our eyes, is that what is was, and what was is. What is unfolding is a reawakening of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, not just in word, but in deed. It's not just the shouts, not just what appears on the screen or in print, but the physical attacks have increased just as well. Many of us thought this hatred was all in the past, but what cannot be disputed, what can no longer be questioned, is that October the 7th opened a door that many felt was permanently sealed. October the 7th publicized not only the savagery perpetrated against our people by Hamas, but it also highlighted much of the world's total lack of compassion and blatant disregard for Jewish lives. Let me repeat that. A total lack of compassion and a blatant disregard for Jewish lives. We, the victims, are now identified as the victimizers. Think about it for a minute, if you will. We are now the guilty party. We are the victimizers. Last week, we discussed the notorious blood libel that dealt with Jews being accused of killing Christian children to obtain blood for making matzos for Passover, for Pesach. This evening, I will touch upon perhaps the most vile and infamous libel that has stood the test of time, appearing in print and broadcasts in our own time, namely that of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a publication that has long been proven to be an outright fabrication, an outright lie, but one that continues to be quoted to this very day, one that continues to spread the flames of anti-Semitism worldwide. My dear friends, my dear listeners, this is not ancient history. These libels, are prime examples of what history was and continues to be. Outright lies that appear on the internet, on college campuses, and in publications and broadcasts provided by both the right and left in our beloved country and across the globe. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is, without a doubt, the most infamous and widely distributed anti-Semitic publication of modern times. Although falsehoods about Jews have been repeatedly discredited, this lie continues to circulate to this day, especially on the internet. Those who continue to use and quote from the Protocols are simply using an outright lie to prop up and legitimize their hatred of both the Jewish people and the State of Israel. The Protocols, as mentioned, is entirely a work of fiction, similar to other libels such as the blood libel that we recently discussed, and one that was intentionally produced to blame Jews for the ills of mankind. Those who quote from the Protocols claim that it documents a Jewish conspiracy to dominate the world. The conspiracy and its alleged leaders, the so-called Elders of Zion, never existed. But that doesn't matter. People believe what they want to believe, even if it's an outright lie. To quote Nobel Prize laureate Elie Wiesel, if ever a piece of writing could produce mass hatred, it is this one. This book is about lies and slander. In 1903, portions of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion were serialized in a Russian newspaper, Znamya, the Banner. The Protocols have since long endured and was translated into dozens of languages. Although the exact origin of the Protocols is unknown, it was meant to portray Jews as conspirators against the state. In 24 chapters referred to as Protocols, notes from secret meetings of Jewish leaders, the so-called elders of Israel, met to formulate secret plans to rule the world by manipulating the economy, controlling the media, and spreading religious conflict. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? How often do we hear today about how Jews control Wall Street, that Jews control Hollywood and the press? These accusations live on and continue to ignite suspicion and hatred of Jews worldwide. Following the Russian Revolution of 1917, the Protocols journeyed west. Editions soon circulated across Europe and the United States, South America, and Japan. An Arabic translation first appeared in the 1920s and became quite popular. In 1920, auto magnate Henry Ford's newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, published a series of articles based on the Protocols. The book, The International Jew, soon appeared and was based on these articles. This book, formulated entirely on outright lies, was soon translated into at least 16 languages, and it should come as no surprise that both Hitler and Joseph Goebbels, the head of the propaganda ministry in Nazi Germany, praised Ford for his scholarly work, The International Jew. In 1921, the London Times presented conclusive proof that the Protocols was a clumsy plagiarism. The Times confirmed that the Protocols had been copied in large part from a French political satire that never mentioned Jews. But who cared? No one cared. The disease spread and Jews were immediately put at risk. Jews were beaten and killed as a result of this false libel. Hitler was introduced to the Protocols during the early 1920s and the Protocols was instrumental in helping Hitler develop his worldview. Hitler referred to the Protocols in some of his early political speeches, and throughout his career, he exploited the myth that Jewish communists were conspiring to control the world. The U.S. Senate issued a report in 1964 declaring that the Protocols was a pure fabrication. The Senate called the contents of the Protocols gibberish and criticized those who peddled the Protocols for using the same propaganda technique as Hitler. During the 1980s, Muslim groups peddled the forgery worldwide. The Muslim Student Association at Wayne State University in Michigan and at the University of California at Berkeley disseminated the document. American black Muslim groups have sold it. The Protocols were for sale at an Islamic exhibition in Stockholm and in London's Park Mosque. And during a 1986 conference sponsored by the Islamic Center of Southern California, the Protocols were prominently displayed. Then, based on a perverse interpretation of the Protocols, the Saudi Arabian government blamed Israel for an attack on the synagogue in Istanbul in 1986. The Internet has dramatically increased access to the Protocols. Even though many websites expose the Protocols as a fraud, the Internet has made it easy to use the Protocols to spread hatred of Jews. A Soviet book released in 1987 called On the Class Essence of Zionism, repeat mention is made of the lies perpetrated by the Protocols, particularly in reference to Jews seeking to gain control of the world. So, what was, as I said, is, and what is, was, could not be more true. I thank you so much for listening, and I will now hand the microphone over to Ari. Ari, it's yours.
Okay, thank you, Shelley. So, Bob, you mentioned the expulsion of Jews from Muslim countries. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Hold on one second. So I want to talk about Jewish refugees from Muslim countries. I want to talk about our Sephardic Jewish brothers and sisters. Now, the world knows about the European Jewish refugees, and I think for some, if you were to ask them what is a Jew, they'll just tell us that we're European. We're European invaders, we're colonizers, and very often we hear the rhetoric, we should just go back to where we came from. We should go back to fill in the blank, fill in the European country. And it's as though the world has either forgotten, more likely never knew about any of the Jewish refugees from the Middle East and African countries. So I want to talk about that because we hear a lot about Palestinian refugees and their numbers, but what about Jewish refugees? And again, focusing specifically on those Jews from Muslim countries, and sometimes I might even say Arab countries, even though, Arab countries don't include Turkey and Iran. Technically, so I might go back and forth. I'm splitting hairs here. So with the Palestinian refugees, we had, and there's going to be a lot of numbers in this presentation, so anywhere from between 700,000 to 750,000 Palestinian refugees that have grown tenfold, according to Refugees International. There's now 7 million Palestinian refugees, and according to the UN, there are 5.9 million Palestinians who are currently registered as refugees. And again, that includes more than 1 million of Gaza's roughly 2 million residents. So let's go over some numbers. Before Israel gained its independence in 1948, do you know how many Jews lived in the Muslim world? 900,000 Jews lived in the Muslim world. Today, there are fewer than 10,000. So in the subsequent years after 1948, when the Arab countries attacked Israel, and Israel gained its independence, over 850,000 of those 900,000 were either expelled or fled from their countries, which means there were more Jewish refugees from Arab countries than Palestinian refugees from Israel. I think it's worth repeating, because we hear a lot about the Palestinian refugees and how many there were and how many there are. There were more Jewish refugees from Arab countries than there were Palestinian refugees from Israel. And these Jews had lived in those countries for over 2,000 years. Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Libya, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. So of those 850,000, roughly, 650,000 went to Israel, and 200,000 went to the U.S. and other Western countries in Europe, Canada, Australia. Now, I'm going to go over some numbers, so get your pen and paper ready. Now, again, these are estimates, but they paint the picture. We're going to look at how many Jews were in a particular country in 1948, and then what happened over time. So, again, this is not every Muslim country, but again, it gives you an idea. In Algeria, there were 140,000 Jews in 1948. None by 2012. Egypt, 75,000. There were 3, according to one report, in 2022. And not, by the way, not 3,000, just 3. 1, 2, 3. Syria, 30,000 Jews, 4 in 2022. Iraq, at one point in 1948, had 150,000 Jews. By 2003, 35, according to one estimate. Yemen, 63,000 Jews in 1948, 50 by 2016. Lebanon, 24,000 in 1948, now somewhere between 20 and 40. And Iran, 1948, between 140 and 150,000 Jews. Post-Islamic Revolution, so that happened in 1979, between 1979 and 2006, more than 80% of the Jewish population fled Iran. So we see that the Jews have been persecuted and had to flee their Muslim countries. But what about the Arabs living in Israel? One would think if Israel was a vengeful country, that the Arabs would not be thriving in Israel. They would be kicked out, the same way that the Jews were kicked out. Well, let's see what the numbers have to say. just after 1948, after Israel's independence, there were 150,000 Arabs living in Israel. You know how many You know how many Arabs are living in Israel now? Over 2 million. That represents 21% of the population of Israel are Arabs. And mind you, these are people who have equal rights just as the Jewish citizens have. So the numbers show that Jews have been persecuted and oppressed, and yet, as Shelley said earlier, somehow we are the oppressors. The Jews are the oppressors. I think there's a quote that's worth telling over. Repeat a lie often enough, and it becomes the truth. That is a quote attributed to none other than Joseph Goebbels, chief propagandist for the Nazis, and we see it today. So what's the takeaway? What's the takeaway from all these numbers I've thrown out? We see a tale of two people. One group, on the one hand, we have refugees that have only grown in number, and they continue to label themselves and continue to be labeled by the world as refugees for 75 years. And then we have another group. These are other refugees that no one talks about, but we did tonight. And by the way, there were more of those refugees than the other group. 850,000 Jews who were either kicked out of or had to flee for their lives from Arab countries. Did they protest? Did they call themselves victims of genocide? Were there cries of ethnic cleansing? Are their descendants refugees? No. They resettled. They made new lives for themselves. They integrated and thrived in new home countries. Put simply, they moved on. And Bob and Shelley, and to our listeners, the Jewish people will continue to move on because we are a people of faith and a people of hope. And it is no coincidence that the national anthem of Israel is called HaTikva, the hope. And that hope has sustained us as a people and will continue to sustain us until the ultimate redemption. May we see it speedily in our days. Bob?
Those are wonderful presentations, and they both highlight the lies that have dominated Jewish life over the centuries and continue to dominate discussions of the Jewish world and Jewish history. And we are trying to dissolve some of those lies in this series. It's worth noting that as Jews, we have not only had to battle and struggle against the lies of others. The tragedy is that some of the lies we battle are lies that we have created ourselves and support. Who lived in the kibbutzim that were decimated and destroyed by Hamas on October 7th? Well-meaning, kind, gentle, hard-working, pacifist Jews who believed in peace with people throughout the Middle East and particularly with the people in the Gaza Strip. Yes, and even with Hamas. They would cook for them. They would take them to doctor appointments and help them build homes and shelters. And of course, they ended up being the first slaughtered. Moreover, these Gazans who worked in these kibbutzim provided Hamas with invaluable information on the structure and operation of the communities to assist Hamas in their attacks. But we believe so strongly in the goodness of others that we sometimes overlook the truth, the emes, what really is going on, and that has happened over the centuries, whether it be in Spain or it be in Germany or it be in the Persian Empire or whether it was in the Greek or even in the Roman Empire. One only has to think of the great story of Purim, how the Persian Jews came to the feast that Achashverosh was setting for them because they believed that Achashverosh meant well and wanted to provide for the Jewish people in his empire. And the truth is that he was already planning to destroy the entire Jewish population of Persia, which would have decimated the Jewish world. But they came. If it wasn't for Mordechai and Esther and a few others, the entire Jewish Persian empire would have been left without a Jewish would have been destroyed and been left without a Jewish population. But that's what we have done. That's what we believe in. We've always followed that pathway. We have to be careful. We have to be smart. We have to be less naive and in clear thinking. And hopefully the events of what have happened with Hamas will help us do that. What do you think?
Well, Bob, I think what you're saying is definitely true. As I made mention earlier about the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and how it's kind of living in its entirety here, let me just quote, if I may, just a couple of sentences from the Protocols, and I think everybody will begin to appreciate that what was said in the Protocols seems to be just rearing its ugly head once again now. And let me just quote a couple of sentences, if I may. And this is what the author states, and I quote, "And only now, when I fear that it is too late, have I succeeded in publishing my work in the hope that I may be able to warn those who still have ears to hear and eyes to see. There is no room left for doubt. With all the might and terror of Satan, the reign of the triumphant King of Israel is approaching our regenerate world. The King born of the blood of Zion, the Antichrist, is near to those of universal power. Events in the world are rushing with stupendous rapidity. Dissensions, wars, rumors, famines, epidemics, and earthquakes. What was but yesterday impossible has today become an accomplished fact. Days rush past, as it were, for the benefit of the chosen people. There is no time to minutely enter into the history of humanity from the point of view of the revealed mysteries of iniquity, to historically prove the influence which the elders of Israel have had on the misfortunes of humanity. Now, doesn't that sound so much like what we're hearing today? How Jews, Israel is the source of all of the world's ills. It's something that we can't just brush aside and say, well, it appeared in the Protocols and it's gone. But I think it's reared its ugly head again, and it's something that we have to consider. I'm going to now ask I'm going to ask Bob if he has just a couple of closing remarks. Thank you so much.
Hopefully our eyes are being opened, our ears are being opened to the truth, and we can help others see and hear the truth at this incredibly important moment in history of the Jewish people as well as history of the world. And remember, everyone remember, Am Yisrael Chai.